Hello, viewers of The Spell, Ree. And today we're going to be doing a video that's a compilation of a series that I pretty much permanently shelved. Because I think it's an enjoyable idea, and yeah, why not put all this in a large compilation to put out and see if my viewer base now, since it's bigger now, whether or not you're interested in seeing more of it. I'll be revisiting some ideas and doing other things like this in the future. But without further ado, let's get into this video. And yes, this was recorded over a year ago, so you are going to notice some differences with the way I sound, that sort of thing. Our story starts off with a young Izuku walking with Bakugo and a couple of Bakugo's friends. Bakugo hadn't yet begun treating Midoriya too harshly. He had already given them the name Deku and started treating him poorly, but it wasn't to the breaking point yet. Izuku and them would be walking through their woods, trying to catch bugs. Bakugo would call Deku pathetic for not being able to catch any, holding up a clear container with several, and calling him Deku. Izuku would just feel his anger welling up a little. He would just tell Bakugo, "Stop calling me that! I don't want to play with you anymore." And he would storm off, Bakugo being surprised at the outburst. Bakugo would mildly think of the consequences of his actions, but he would go back to collecting bugs, as his lackeys praised him for how many he caught, as they continued their waltz through the forest. Well, Izuku would begin walking through the forest. He intended on going home, but he had made a mistake while walking. He'd wound up walking in the wrong direction and got lost. At that point, he began to cry, being a 6-year-old child, just realizing that he had no idea where he was going. He had started to wish he had just stuck with Bakugo and his friends. A few hours would pass with Izuku, not remembering the proper instructions when you're lost, would begin trying to retrace his steps, just getting more lost. The sun was starting to go down, and Izuku would begin crying again, realizing that he was gonna have to spend the night, and he had no way to maneuver in the dark. No flashlights, no nothing. At this, he would begin to cry again, feeling scared and not safe. His mother had watched a scary movie. She had thought he had gone to sleep on the couch, but he had remembered enough of it to remember it was scary and it was in the dark. He wound up just finding a tree to hide behind and started crying. He had imagined things in the forest looking at him. This just served to freak him out more. He wanted to go somewhere else, anywhere else, with light or anything, as a rift would begin to form. Izuku would simply look up to see this. It looked a little lighter there. He was questioning what it was, until he heard a bark not too far away. He would be scared, thinking that wild dogs were after him, or some other monster he had thought of, being a 6-year-old child, as he would go through, thinking it could be safe. When he did, he would find himself in a different place. It was a full moon and it was bright, unlike where he came from, where the moon was simply a sliver. He would look around and realize he was still in a dark forest. You could still hear barking in the distance, but he then heard cooing. He looked up to see it was an owl, just looking at him. The owl would fly off, and Izuku would simply start to get concerned. He thought maybe he should go back through, but when he looked back, the portal was closed. He couldn't get back. At this, he would begin to cry. He would walk a little ways to find an interesting structure. He thought it was rock. It was hard and rough, but he found he could go inside of it and it was quite open. He would wind up sleeping under the structure. He wound up crying himself to sleep underneath the structure. When he woke to birds chirping. It would only take him a second to remember where he was. His body was damp with dew, as he looked around to see it was a white-ish structure. He saw light coming from outside of it, and he would walk out. After that he would decide that he has to try to find help. Start walking and notice that there was smoke in the distance. And he had remembered seeing in a movie that smoke meant people. But he would determine that he had to think more before he acted, remarking that he could use the structure he was in now. It looked big enough. He could use that as the point of origin, and he could use that to tell where he was going. He'd remember seeing this in one of a children's programming thing, that you should try to use a defining structure or something else like that to tell where you were when you're out exploring. This was a lesson he had neglected when they're in the woods, when there were no defining things outside of trees. So he would determine this and walk towards the smoke. He would quickly see it was a village. As he would look back to the structure, so he took note of where he was. Then he would notice it was a skull with horns and 3 eyes. He would be shocked that he had spent the night in a giant skull. But this would be little concern considering he was still freaking out about being in a completely new place. He would wind up going to the village after that. He decided after he got to the village, he should probably ask about the giant skull. But when he got to the village, no one seemed to understand him, which just made him start feeling that he had made a horrible mistake, as he just started crying for his mommy. Remember, he is 6 years old, as 2 boys would approach him, one with white hair and one with black. They would ask him if he was okay in their own language. Izuku would simply respond in confusion. He couldn't understand what they were saying, as the black-haired boy, which the other one called Yuno, would go get someone while the white-haired boy kept an eye on him. They would wind up going to get Sister Lily, who would wind up taking Izuku to the Elder. The Elder, after trying to talk to Izuku and realizing that he wasn't speaking the same language, would get a little pendant for him. They would put it over Izuku's head, and Izuku could tell what they were saying, or at least understand the meaning. The old man would be happy that this worked. He had picked up the pendant in his younger days, when he wandered more before settling down. This pendant had the power to translate the meaning of what different people said. He had found it to not be that useful, since the common language of the Clover Kingdom and the surrounding countries were about the same, with little difference. But he never got rid of it. After that, they would just ask Izuku where he was from. Izuku would just say whatever town or district of a city he's from, and that he had a mother. They would not know where this was, and they would tell him that he's currently in Hage Village, in the Forsaken Realm of the Clover Kingdom. Izuku, not being taught geography until later, he is only about 6 here, would just assume he managed to teleport himself to some other country. He knew he didn't live in the Clover Kingdom, or at least he was pretty sure it was a place called Japan. They would just not know what this meant, as the translation would not translate it since it was a name. The old man would think about it, as he asked Izuku how he came here. Did someone push him through a portal, or did he make one, or anything like that? Izuku would answer with the first little bit of the what if, the part with him going through the portal and waking up in the woods nearby. The old man would just nod, saying that it must have been a spatial magic accident, and that Midoriya probably had spatial magic. Midoriya, just being confused, would ask if he meant quirks. The translator would translate to the equivalent, as Sister Lily and the Elder would just look at each other and just assume that he meant magic. Sister Lily and the Elder would just look at each other and nod and just tell Midoriya that here it's just called magic. He would realize later that there was very distinct differences, but not at the moment. So Izuku would just realize that if he wanted to go home, he just had to activate his quirk, as he just held out his hand, hoping that a portal would appear, wanting it to happen. Nothing would happen, as the old man asked Sister Lily if Asa could spend a few nights at the orphanage until either someone came looking for him or until he activated his spatial magic again to get home. Sister Lily would nod as they would go outside to find the boys who would now be introduced to Izuku, Asta and Yuno. Asta would be the first one to hold out his hand and say that he hopes they'll be good friends. Izuku would meet with the father of the church, and he would wind up getting situated for the night. It would take him a full 2 weeks to figure out how to reactivate his magic, which, yes, it is basically magic. His quirk allows him to have magic, which is dimensional magic. As he's finally able to activate it, and says goodbye to everyone. They say visit soon, which he will be able to do, as Izuku went through the portal and managed to find his way home. His mother had been worried sick for the last 2 weeks. The police had been called and everything. Pro heroes had even gone out looking for him. She would quickly call the police and say that he had come home and took him to the doctor. Worried sick, she would just ask the doctor if he was okay, and the doctor would actually be surprised. He had done just fine. He had eaten just fine, and when they asked him what happened, he simply told them that he awakened his quirk. It allowed him to travel to places, and he accidentally traveled to a place called Hage Village. They would have no way to find Hage Village, as they just assumed the boy was mispronouncing it. They wouldn't press it too much further, since it was obvious that the people in the village hadn't harmed Izuku in any way, and had actually helped him figure out how to get back. So, with that being said, they wouldn't really push the issue. Bakugo would actually apologize, changing the relationship from canon. He would still be mean to Izuku, but he wouldn't be nearly as bad of a bully, since he had felt responsible for his disappearance. And Izuku had awakened his quirk, as they would just say that it was some sort of dimensional ability, and they would just leave it at that. Izuku would consider himself to have a spatial quirk, as over time he would actually go back and forth between the worlds. His mother had picked up gardening during the 2 weeks he had disappeared to try to relieve stress. He would wind up actually selling seeds and whatnot to the villagers of Hage Village and some of the surrounding area, as he figured out that he actually was able to travel to a fantasy world. Yeah, he was 7 when he made that realization, and he would begin to sell seeds and whatnot to the villagers. He would first attempt to give them to them as gifts, but they would wind up paying him back. He wound up making a small business by selling spices and different plants and whatnot. Not going to interfere with the what if too much, but it would actually mean that Hage Village and the surrounding village wouldn't just have to survive off pot potatoes. They would have sweet potatoes, tomatoes, different peppers, so on and so forth, which ironically meant that they were actually doing a lot better financially, since they had the ability to sell other goods besides pot potatoes. And they had some plants that not even the royal capital had, which would encourage trade. Just a little thing I thought of, not a big thing to the what if. And his friendship with Asta and Yuno would grow even more, to the point where they were genuinely friends, acting as a trio of brothers, more so than just basic friends. He would also wind up learning the language of the Clover Kingdom, not needing the pendant to tell what they were saying. Now, a quick break from the what if. I have started a what if anime subreddit. This is a place for people who like what ifs or fan fictions in general to come together. You can post what ifs, what if videos, even memes. Currently I'm the only member, and I would love to have more people join and share their own content. And now, part 2. Alright, so we start off the story with a time skip to when Midoriya was 13. He was walking down an alley when he felt something like a little yell in the back of his head. He turned around, seeing a black portal and a man with a suit and a odd helmet with no eye holes walk out. Midoriya asked if he could help him with anything, and the man said yes. I would like your quirk. Midoriya got in a fighting stance and reached for something as he summoned a knife. As Midoriya got ready for a fight, but before he knew it, the man had shot forward faster than Midoriya could perceive and grab his head. The next thing Midoriya remembered was pain, but when he woke up, he realized he had been out for about an hour, and he had tried using his quirk. It worked. It felt a little different though, but it worked. I'm pretty sure I said this before, but I'll just reiterate. His quirk is the ability to absorb mana. He actually still has that ability, in a sense, since he already has mana in his body. So he can just use magic like the people of the Clover Kingdom. Dimensional magic. As we then go forward to when he was 14. As the teacher had thrown up the papers, saying that he knew they would all try for the hero course. The students cheered and roared in excitement. Except for two. Bakugo, who jumped up on to his desk, saying, "Don't let me in with these extras. The best they'll do is being a sidekick for some D-lister. I'm gonna become the greatest hero, even greater than All Might." As the rest of the class booed, Midoriya, who was looking out the window, would look over at this, thinking that, not that personality. As the teacher then said, "Midoriya, aren't you intending to go to UA? Just like young Bakugo here." As Bakugo glared at Midoriya, just said, "Yeah." As Bakugo went to explode Izuku's desk as a sign of dominance, but Izuku, before that happened, would just say dimensional storage magic on the things on his desk. When Bakugo exploded, there would be no schoolwork or any of that on his desk. And Bakugo would just say, "Are you trying to show me up, Deku?" As Midoriya would just say, "No, I'm trying to become a hero. And maybe one thing is not to try to explode school property." As Bakugo glared at him, the teacher at that point would say, "Enough. Bakugo, you know quirks aren't allowed in school. Take a seat or you'll be going to the principal's office." As Bakugo huffed and went back, Izuku would have all the stuff on his desk appear in a small purple light before taking a seat. The class would end and Bakugo wouldn't confront Izuku like in canon, but just let him be. But a difference from canon would be one of Bakugo's lackeys asking Bakugo why Izuku's always in a rush to get out of school. Bakugo, not knowing that answer, would say, "Yeah, good question. Want to follow him?" The lackeys would just go along with it, as they would follow Midoriya, which would be leaving class sooner than in canon. When he got to an overpass with a train bridge over it, Midoriya would just reach out with his hand and go in. Bakugo and them watching from the sidelines would see a light indicating Midoriya use his quirk. When they ran forward, they didn't see him. They thought they saw some glowing lettering when he went through, but they weren't sure. Bakugo would just say, "It must have been one of you idiots who made so much noise he caught on." As the two others just kind of shrugged. They had only wasted a few minutes, and they just asked Bakugo, "Hey, do you want to go to that shopping district? I heard they put in a new arcade." As Bakugo said, "Yeah, I feel like I should be able to blow some steam at that Mortal Kombat game." As they walked off. You see, Midoriya had been studying enchanting. He had bought a few books on it, and had learned how to enchant solid portal locations. That way he could travel through them. And he appeared right outside of Hage Village. And Asta would be excited. They had talked Midoriya into bringing him to his world. Midoriya had told them so much about heroes and villains that the two were actually really excited. Asta even said, "Hey, you think we'll be able to see your All Might, the Hero King?" As Yuno just looked at him and said, "Asta, it's a number one hero." As Asta caught himself, Izuku would actually chuckle at this. back when he had to wear the pendant before he actually learned how to speak in the language of the Clover Kingdom, there were all kinds of little inconsistencies he realized had happened. Asta, for a long time, thought the number one hero was like the Wizard King in an official position. It took him a while to explain to him that it was more of an honorary title that could go away from year to year, but All Might had held it for the last 10? Midoriya just kinda was surprised he didn't know that answer, as he just shrugged and said he'll have to take a look at that later. As mentioned that there was someone that was actually asking around about him a few days ago. As Midoriya said, was it someone looking to buy some seeds or something? Would nod no. He said had heard there was someone with an odd magic in town. We told him you were out, and then he mentioned he might come back later to see you. Midoriya would just shrug and say that, yeah, maybe when he gets back. He's going to be busy getting ready for UA in the next few months, so he doesn't know if he'll be able to regularly come back. As Asta just said, alright, are we ready to go? As Midoriya nodded. He would reach forward and prepare to open up the portal back. As the three of them went into the purple doorway that appeared, a figure watched from a distance with yellow hair. He smiled and said, well, that's something. I wonder if that's... As a white image appeared next to him. My lord, get back here and do your paperwork. I already have 32 new reports in. The yellow-haired man just said, Marks, just calm down. I'll be there in a minute. Sir, you and I both know if I do not pester you, you will not get it done for a week. And more paperwork will pile up. And I'm not good enough to forge your signature every single time. The yellow-haired man sighed. You would have to investigate this kid later. Work called. And Marks wasn't going to give up until he got back. He would get on a broom and fly towards the capital. Going back to the main group, they arrived in the alley. Baku and his cronies had left. And also just remarked that it was different than he expected. Midoriya would chuckle and just tell him that they were under a bridge. They'll be seeing more of their world soon. As a manhole exploded a few feet from him. All three of them turned, with Asta asking if that's normal, just having things explode from the ground. Midoriya would say no, as green sludge would emerge. The green sludge would just say, hey, I'm just gonna go ahead and steal your body. Or body. As all three of them just looked at him. He would jump towards Asta, the closest one to the manhole cover, as obliterated him with air. Asta would jump back, now out of the reach of the monster, as Midoriya charged up a ball of mana in his hand and fired it. Called it his mana shot. As the orb impacted, the sludge was blasted back by just the raw force of the energy that had attacked it. If you're wondering how he can do this, it's pretty simple. Rades, the same one who uses Wraith magic, also has a cursed orb he can throw that he doesn't need a spell for. It's similar for Midoriya's mana shot. Problem is, it's not that powerful. As the sludge monster just shrugged off the mana shot 2 seconds later. Midoriya would start wondering what to do as All Might appeared from the sewer and quickly one-shot their opponent. Midoriya would begin fanboying, and Asta would ask him if this was All Might. Midoriya would just tell him yes. As Asta decided he wanted to ask him something. Could someone without any magic, or as the pendant would translate, quirk, become a magic knight, or as the pendant would refer to it, hero? All Might would sign Midoriya's notebook, and Asta would ask him this. All Might would pause for a second. Internally, he would debate what he would say, but he also could feel his time limit coming up. He would tell Asta that it was far too dangerous, and that he might want to look for a less dangerous profession. Midoriya would be shocked at this response. All Might was always the person who said anyone could be a hero, as All Might jumped away with a surprisingly forceful jump. Asta would look to the ground and be discouraged, but also just immediately pull back up. This was just someone else he would have to convince otherwise. Midoriya would help encourage him, as Yuno wasn't sure what to say. Both him and Midoriya felt like they were debating whether or not they should encourage Asta to become a Magic Knight. They didn't want to see his dreams crushed, but they didn't want to see his friend hurt either. Midoriya also debated whether or not he should just see if Asta failed the Magic Knight exam, if he should try out for UA. He had seen Asta's physical strength in action, and if someone didn't know better, they would probably say he had a strength enhancement quirk. But Midoriya would just say, how about we get some to eat? I know a good place. As they would walk off. Unbeknownst to All Might, the sludge villain would escape and, like in canon, cause a ruckus. Our trio of three would arrive there and find Bakugo being trapped. Midoriya would see this and debate what to do. Maybe he can use one of his spells to get him. The heroes were at disadvantage. Yuno would look there surprised, waiting for a cue on what to do, whether these heroes should handle it, or if, since no one else was approaching, Yuno would just assume that these people were supposed to handle it, and Asta would run forward, ready to save the person. Midoriya would follow 2 seconds behind him, and Yuno would just shrug and follow soon after. Asta would run forwards with surprising speed, dodging one of the sludge attacks. Midoriya, using one of his other skills called Dimensional Slide, would get behind the sludge villain and try to pull some of the sludge away from Bakugo's face. As the sludge villain realized Midoriya was there and tried to smack him, Asta would actually come in for a kick, managing to take out one of the sludge monster's eyeballs, which the sludge villain just simply yelled in frustration. He was about ready to smack them both away when Yuno just followed up with concentrated wind attacks he would normally use to cut wood, but used it to sever the appendages the sludge monster had shot out. The sludge monster howled in frustration now. The fact that these three had shown up again and were managing to actually cause more damage than the heroes. All Might, who had arrived in Small Might form, would appear and question what to do. Seeing the trio of three he had just stopped earlier would fill him with shame. Shame that he wasn't willing to push himself further to save another person, as he buffed up and ran in, blowing away the sludge monster. Like in canon. Yuno, Asta, and even Midoriya would all be in awe of this power. As Asta said, "Wow, I bet he could rival the captain, or maybe even the Wizard King." As Yuno was left speechless. Meanwhile, Midoriya would also be speechless until he heard a man saying, "Hey, kids, you shouldn't have..." As Midoriya panicked. Yuno and Asta had no paperwork and nothing. Even if he just said that they were foreigners, if they couldn't find any paper, that would raise too many questions. As he walked up and quickly grabbed both of them by the shoulders. he would just say, "Greater teleportation," as a purple light would envelop them all and teleport them away. All Might would just, as the other heroes thanked All Might and were hoping that those kids wouldn't become vigilantes or something like that. But they managed to not get a lecture, as the heroes both praised and gave a small lecture to Bakugo about not overdoing his quirk, since a lot of the fire was his fault. Bakugo would just wonder who those two with Midoriya were, as he silently thought whether or not he should thank Midoriya. All Might would just get swarmed by paparazzi, and he would give them the escape. Several alleys over, our trio would be walking. Midoriya would actually apologize for their view of his world being a villain attack and some food, but mostly a villain attack and having to run away. Asa and Yuno would just say it was fine, it was fine. The food was actually pretty good. As All Might would appear, as he would pop into his Small Might form. All of them would be shocked, and even Yuno would go from a stoic face to a surprised face. As All Might just coughed and just said that, then just give a similar explanation to Canon, not mentioning One for All or any of that, and just tell him that it was a fight, and that say that he had the ability to buff up into his hero form, but that most of the time he looked like the form before them. They would be shocked and that, but All Might would have something else to say. Something to Asta. He would tell him that he was sorry for what he said before, and that anyone could become a hero. Asta, just having a huge smile on his face, with someone encouraging him, would just say yes. As All Might would actually throw out a suggestion that they could help strength train by working at Dagobah Beach to help clean it up. He would not decide to make any of them his successor yet, and decided to see if they would go to UA or any of that. During Midoriya's training in the Clover Kingdom, they would meet Fonzel Kruger, which, for those who do not know, he is the red-headed man who trained Asta how to fight with a sword during the 6-month time skip at the very beginning of the story. If you don't know who he is, just fine. Just want to preference who this was. He also shows up in the Witch's Forest arc. So, just I might as well specify that. So they would meet him, and similar to Asta, Fonzel would ask Midoriya what his goal was. He would state it, and Fonzel would smile, agreeing to train both of them to help him get things going. On that, this little bit goes very similar. The big thing is he gave Midoriya some tips on how to form his dimensional magic into more of an offensive style. He gained the ability to, similar to Von Zell, where he can make if he had something to make a hilt, he could form a sword out of his magic. Dimensional creation magic sword. As this basically happened like in canon for the Clover Kingdom, except Asta was there. We then fast forward just a couple weeks before the Magic Knight exam, and just a little while after that would be the UA entrance exam. Yuno had been training on his own for the most part, while Asta and Midoriya would be training together, with them also going to the My Hero Academia world to do strength training. Midoriya would be similarly buff to his canon counterpart, as he would be conducting his business of selling herbs and seeds in the Clover Kingdom. Would be asked over by a couple he helped a while back by giving them cold medicine, as the man was a woodcutter in the woods. He would tell Midoriya that he had found something he wanted to give to him to thank him for saving his wife from that cold. Midoriya would try to decline, but the man would insist. The older man would simply explain that He had recovered the staff during the Diamond Kingdom War that happened not that long ago. Despite it looking cool, he's found no use for it. And since it was made in the Diamond Kingdom, not that many people around here are looking for it. But he thought Midoriya could make good use of it. Midoriya would accept it, and he would gain his first magical weapon. Midoriya would look at it impressed. It had the ability to charge magic energy into a condensed form and shoot it out. Besides that, he could charge it with magic. It was also made up of a sturdy black material with a purple crystal on top. The man would insist. It's useless to him, and the only thing it's given him is potential trouble if anyone found out he had something so valuable. With him telling Midoriya that, Midoriya would accept his secondary, another weapon. A staff he would call the Dimensional Staff. He would charge it up with his own magic over the coming days. Fast forwarding to the Magic Knight exam. This would go almost exactly as canon, but with Midoriya in the stands, encouraging it on. He would be concerned for Asta until Yami accepted him into the squad. When both Yuno and Asta were about to leave, Midoriya would just say, "Hey, wait! I got a gift for both of you," as he took out a small orb. Asta and Yuno would ask what that was, and he would just say that he enchanted a communication device, handing him the crystal orb. As he just said, that this would allow them to talk to him no matter where they are, even across dimensions. Yuno and Asta would look wide-eyed. "Midoriya came up with this?" "I figured out the formula a while back. Don't worry about taking it. These are just prototypes." As Asta would thank him. As Yami would just say, "Hey, newbie, are you trying to make us late?" As Asta would run off. Yuno would join his new Golden Dawn compatriots, and Midoriya would begin training for the UA entrance exam. Fast forwarding to the UA entrance exam. He looked at the UA building where he'd take the exam. He stared up at it for a minute, hyping himself up, saying, "Alright, this won't be a big deal. Austin, you know how to take their exam in front of tons of people in a coliseum. This is nothing." But before he could start walking forward, he heard a voice behind him. "Hey, nerd. I see you decided to take the UA entrance exam. Don't you dare try to one-up me." As Midoriya would just roll his eyes. "Good morning to you too, Bakugo." As Bakugo just said, "Same here, you stupid nerd. Now if you don't mind, some people here need to become heroes." As Midoriya would just simply think, "Jeez, do you really think you're going to become a hero with that attitude?" As he would just simply begin walking forward, but nearly trip. Luckily, a brown-haired girl would save him from face-planting, as he would also just thank her. After all, it wouldn't be a good look if he had tripped even before he got through the door. As, well, things would continue. Midoriya would get a seat in the hall and have President Mike explain to him. He would be furiously mumbling things about how it's curious how they're having such an emphasis on villain points. There has to be some sort of other point system, right? It isn't like they could just be deciding who they let on combat prowess, could it? Or perhaps maybe they're just looking for strong people as a beginner and there's some other applications. Maybe they'll be giving you quirk points on how you use your quirk. As it would just be similar with Ida interrupting about the zero pointer, pointing out how it wasn't on the main thing. President Mike would just explain how that's an obstacle to be avoided. Midoriya perking up at this, realizing that, well, that's probably going to be one heck of a surprise if they're not even willing to explain what it is. But then Ida would call him out for mumbling for everyone. Midoriya would just say, "Sorry, I mumble when I'm nervous." As President Mike would just say, "Alright, now if that's all the questions, please go to your designated training areas." As him and Bakugo would go in separate areas. Midoriya, who had used his magic to store his grimoire, so no one noticed it. Same thing with his mystic sword hilt, which he created in between Asta going to the Black Bulls, and now in his staff. Well, he would prepare for the exam. Once they get here, he saw the girl, I'll just call her Ochako, because, well, I guess she would just explain what her name was before. Nervous. Instead of walking up to her, he would just say, "Hey, Ochako, you'll do great," and give her a thumbs up and a smile, doing his best Asta impression. Ida wouldn't stop him since his intentions were much clearer here. Ida would also begin getting a different impression of him as the gates would open. After a second, Midoriya would realize, "Oh, I bet they're not actually going to tell us to start," as he would just whisper to himself, "Shift," as he would disappear and appear in the zone, everyone being surprised. As President Mike would just come on and say, "There's no start in a real battle. Take some incentive like that kid," as everyone would rush in. Midoriya would have started fighting robots, using shift and some hard objects to slam it into them. He quickly realized that there were off switches for those without heavy offensive quirks, as he would just use shift to get behind them and start flipping them. He would also begin assisting other people with theirs, getting some hero points early. Meanwhile, in the viewing room, they would be evaluating Midoriya's power. They would say how it's kind of interesting. He's using his quirk to seemingly teleport. Some wondering if it was super speed, when Aizawa, who was watching this, would simply pull up a kid's file, since they were all curious what the quirk was. It said he had some portal quirk, but that doesn't look like a portal. Is it possible he's learned how to use his quirk in another way before even becoming a student? They would simply start saying, he'll probably be a good student, as they examined the other areas, writing down notes and who they thought might make good heroes, both based on their actions and their use of their quirks. Meanwhile, Midoriya wouldn't be using heavy amounts of magic, but he would begin starting to get pushed in using his mana shot on some of the robots. He realized the disadvantage of going out in front of everyone was the robots can all gang up on you. As Midoriya started realizing he was using a lot of magic, just simply keeping up with these things. It won't look good if he passes out or is unable to fight because of loss of magic. He would notice an empty rooftop and teleport to that. He would begin catching his breath, saying, "I have to have quite a few villain points, right? I have to have quite a few points by now, right? Even though some of those robots I didn't destroy, but I did damage. Hopefully that's enough." As he would hear the ground rumbling, and some sirens going off. He would wonder what that is, before seeing the giant zero-pointer come out of the ground. He would just look at it and think, "Yeah! Obstacle my butt! That thing looks like it was designed to fight Godzilla!" As he would simply look down and think, there's no point in fighting it. And there's also no point in simply giving up. I bet this is... As he just heard a girl yell. He noticed Ochako being pinned under rocks. It was clear that they had fallen on her. No one else was running to her. And worst off, she was right in the path of the robot. He quickly put two and two together and thought, oh god. Whoever's running this exam mustn't see her, otherwise they would redirect the robot. She's gonna get run over. As he would summon his grimoire, as it would flip through, he would teleport down to her and just say, "Hold on, I'll handle this." As he started using dimensional magic. Void Circle. As he would start using that spell, which created a orb of darkness that would then expand and absorb anything within it, to quickly start disposing of the debris. He would grab Ochako and pull her out of the rubble. The problem is he couldn't use slide how he was now. And worst off, the robot seems to not just move, it's punching. So as he looked at the robot, he would summon his staff and say, "Orb of Darkness." As he would shoot the orb, it would expand and take off most of the Zero Pointer's arm. He would grab Ochako and do the bridle carry and just carry her away as fast as he can. Once he got out of the zone, he would put her down and ask if she was hurt in any way. She would respond with no, and then the sirens would go off to say the test was over. Ochako would look worried that she didn't get enough points. Midoriya would just give her a thumbs up and say, "I'm sure you'll do just fine." As this was his concern too. He was mostly just trying to channel the positivity of Asta. As he also realized that, oh crap, if they start asking about my grimoire, that's gonna bring up some questions I really don't want to answer. As he just quickly headed to the exit. Go back home, and while I was waiting for the UA acceptance letter, which he didn't even know he would get, he was just pacing around the house, nervous and all that. He would actually decide, I'm just gonna go see Asta. Maybe he can calm my nerves. When he contacted Asta using the communication orb, Asta would just be really excited to get in contact with him. He would say that he finally got his first star. 2 weeks and I got my first star from the Wizard King. Midoriya would just say, "Oh, great to hear that. Do you mind if I stop by the Black Bull's hideout?" As Asta said, "Sure, we're a little low on a couple things. If you wouldn't mind bringing some food." As Midoriya would buy some food. He would meet the rest of the Black Bulls, and Charmy would find him things like peppers and tomatoes incredibly interesting. Would take a note that Charmy will always be willing to pay for his food. He would meet Yami. Yami would give him a scowl and say, "So, you're our newbie's friend he won't stop talking about. I have to admit, if your magic's half as interesting as you described, I would have probably risen my hand for you." As Yami would just simply smell something. It was some of Midoriya's herbs he had brought in. Hey, is that... As it would be some sort of Japanese herb. Midoriya would say, "No, it's this other thing." But Yami would still be thinking. As he would just say, "Hey kid, I'll pay you for about a pound of that. And some of this and some of this." As Midoriya would be incredibly excited. As inside Yami's head, he would be thinking, "Haha, I'm gonna win our cooking competition this year, Jack. Now that I have some decent spices for the squid, there's no way I'm gonna lose to you." As after having that trip that cheered him up, he would go home. As soon as he opened up his door, his mother would just say, "Izuku, you got a letter from UA." As he would just take it and open it in his room. All Might would greet him using the card and say, "Young Midoriya, I'm glad to see you decided to enter UA. You received just a mere 30. You received 35 villain points. Not bad, but not incredible. But there was another factor to this test." As he showed a video of Ochako offering that if that boy didn't get enough points, that if there was some way that she could transfer some of hers or transfer hers entirely, as they just told her that that boy was getting in just fine. As All Might would just tell him that, "Yes, young Midoriya, you are getting into UA, and not just that, for the 60 rescue points for saving young Ochako and several other people, you are in the top 5. as Midoriya would just look at it slack-jawed. He thought he did okay, but not that good. As All Might then said, "Young Midoriya, I am glad to invite you to your Hero Academia." As All Might would just look over his shoulder and say, "How is that?" As someone off screen would just say, "Good. Now we just have to do 20 to 30, depending on how the other teachers do." As All Might just coughed. "Wait, how am I getting... Wait, what? That's how many I have to do?" As the voice off camera just said, "Yeah, well, you were late, so you got the short end of the stick." As All Might would just say, let's just call it there." As Midoriya realized, they must be getting pushed for time, considering they didn't even edit that part out. As Midoriya would simply tell his mother, and they would celebrate that night. So, with Midoriya being told he is joining 1A, he got his preparations going. And Asta got to work testing out his other equipment that he's going to have with his costume. First off, he would try the staff he had, a metal staff with a gem on the top. He would charge it with mana and cause the staff to release it in a blast of purple lightning. He'd look at the staff and just think, yeah, not gonna point this at anyone, and I'm probably just gonna use it in the really serious fights. And taking inspiration from the man who helped him, I can't remember what his name is. It's the same one who taught Asta sword fighting. He would bring out what looked to be the bottom of a sword with no blade and only a wooden part extending out from the base. That formed a bit of a rounded triangle. Midoriya would enchant it to where he wouldn't need his grimoire to cause a blade to appear from it. He would call it Dimensional Creation Magic Sword, and prepare for classes the next day. The next day, at UA, Izuku would be about to enter his class. Midoriya would just be hoping that Bakugo would not be in his class. Unfortunately, he was sad to see Bakugo was indeed in his class. And he was having an argument with the boy who told Izuku that he was being loud and distracting in the entrance exam. Tenya Ida, telling Bakugo to get his feet off his desk. Bakugo just telling him that he can do whatever he wants. When Ida saw Midoriya, he would walk up to him and apologize for his actions earlier, believing Midoriya knew about the hero points. Midoriya would just say, "I had no idea about the hero points. I just did what anyone would do, and I think that was the point." As Ida just said, "Yes, you must be." After hearing that, Ida would just say, "I see. In that case, I am proud to say you are my fellow student." But before he could finish that, he would just hear her calling him from behind. She called him Deku, which threw him off guard. It was Ochako, as she thanked him for saving her. But she did ask why he seemed to have that reaction when she called him. And Midoriya would just explain that was actually supposed to be an insult. She would look shocked and think to apologize, but Midoriya would just say that I've been called that a long time by Bakugo over there, sticking his thumbs. As Bakugo just saying, "What you saying, nerd?" Since Midoriya's been around Asta, he's gotten a lot bolder. As Midoriya looked behind Ochako and said, "Is that a giant chrysalis or something?" Pointing at Aizawa. At least someone managed to notice me. As everyone got to their seats, Aizawa said, "It took you all 15 seconds to quiet down. That time will need to be improved." As he told them that it's time for a quirk evaluation
test and to put their gym uniforms on. They would meet Aizawa outside. He'd give the ball to Bakugo and tell him to throw it with his quirk. He would throw it and get 700 meters. Everyone would be shocked, as Aizawa would give his normal speech. That our current society has you holding back your potential under the concept of everyone being equal, and that no one's born ungifted. But that's not true. And here at UA, you must acknowledge this, otherwise you will not be able to grow. As everyone nodded. Someone made the mistake of mentioning how this would be fun, and Aizawa would throw in a caveat. Whoever came in last would be expelled. And as someone else said, wait, we've all worked so hard. Why are we going through a secondary test? And shouldn't we be at orientation? You don't have time for such things. As Midoriya wondered, why is he so cranky? As he silently started to wonder if Yami would have been a better choice. But thinking back on it, well, actually, he's pretty sure Yami wouldn't have literally thrown him out of the bus if they couldn't shape up immediately. As everyone would go through the trials as normal, Midoriya would actually do fairly well, unlike in canon. He's trained with Asta, so he's the same physical, and would use his dimensional abilities, like slide, to get an advantage. At the ball throw, Aizawa would be interested to see what he could do, as Midoriya would just ask Aizawa, so, do we have to physically throw it, or can we just literally send it flying with our quirks? Aizawa would nod yes, as Midoriya would create a doorway portal and throw the ball into it. Aizawa would remark he had horrible stance, but after he closed it, the meter would say infinite. Midoriya just threw the ball into the Black Clover world and closed the door. Meanwhile, at the Black Clover universe where he threw the ball would come flying out and accidentally land on one of the kids from Hajj Village. They would yell, yeah, ow, before realizing that they have a new ball. As Aizawa would sigh, this kid, what's his power? Seems very versatile. Oh well. Revealing that it was all a ploy. As Midoriya would just start to think, a ploy my foot. I'm pretty sure if we didn't meet his expectations, he would have kicked all of us out. As Midoriya started to get worried that Aizawa would realize that Midoriya's technically not even using a quirk. They would have class, and a few days later, All Might would just come out and say, welcome, class. And are you ready for your hero training? As everyone is excited, as All Might told them to put on their costumes to look the part. They would all walk out, some regretting the proportions of their costume, while others thought it was perfect. Midoriya would actually have his mother's designed costume like in canon, but it wouldn't look like a green, I don't even know how to describe his canon one. This one would be a dark. Other than that, he would have a cloak over a solid shirt, pants, and boots. While on one hip, he would have his sword hilt, and on the other, he would have his grimoire. He would also have 2 pouches on the back. All Might would go over the training, explaining to them that they will be taking part in a heroes versus villain battle. Midoriya was excited to be teamed up with Ochako. She seemed like a really nice person. And then he would realize that they're going up against Ida and Bakugo, of all people. Midoriya would just mumble that, are you sure these are random? As Ida seemed to be having similar thoughts. But Midoriya would just say, to be fair, if you're on the actual scene, you never know who you're actually gonna team up with and have to work together with. As Ida nodded. The rules would be explained to them that they must capture the bomb that the villains have. The villains win by protecting the bomb until the time limit or capturing the heroes. The heroes win by capturing the villains or the bomb. And let's start. Midoriya would ask Ochako if she had any ideas. She would say no, and Midoriya would just say that he's thinking of one. As they would enter the first floor, Ida and Bakugo would be going similar to Canon, with Bakugo just saying, "I'm gonna go deal with them. You just stay here and guard the bomb." With Ida being frustrated, Bakugo would just be wondering, it's been months. I haven't really mentioned it to Izuku, but who were those people he was with? I haven't seen them before. Those must be his friends. And something just seemed off about them to Bakugo. As the hero team was climbing up looking for the bomb, Ochako would wonder, what's the plan? Midoriya would just say that he has a feeling Bakugo's going to come after him. He'll distract Bakugo while she looks for the bomb. Ochako would nod as, well, Bakugo would show up, yelling at Midoriya, "Hey nerd, fight me! And I want to know who those friends of yours were." As Midoriya got in a battle stance, as both prepared for a fight, Bakugo would open up with an explosion as Midoriya would try to grapple. That would only last a second before Bakugo would break free and explode in Izuku's face. Izuku would go back in a cloud of smoke. As he pulled his sword hilt, he would channel mana into it and say, "Dimensional creation magic. Dimension sword." A ethereal-looking sword blade would come out of his sword hilt. As they prepared to fight, they would lunge at each other with Bakugo using his gauntlets to block the sword strikes and responding with explosions. In the waiting room where everyone was observing, several students would remark how it looks like they're fighting pretty intensely, with even All Might taking note of this. Midoriya is not holding any slashes back, and Bakugo is fighting with all of his strength as well. Midoriya would be finding himself a little bit on the back foot fighting someone like Bakugo, with Bakugo constantly creating explosions in Midoriya's face and Midoriya not being able to get clean hits. While Bakugo would be a little bit miffed how Midoriya just summoned his sword. His quirk was spatial oriented, he thought. As Midoriya would just say, "Shift." As Midoriya tapped his back foot and jumped forward, he would suddenly appear in front of Bakugo and make a slash. Bakugo would use his explosions and jump backwards, as the fight would continue. And with this new development, everyone in the observation room would be shocked. Wait, I thought Midoriya's abilities was that sword, or is it spatial oriented? As someone said, no, I was surprised when he pulled out that sword. I saw him destroy the zero pointer with some weird orb. Everyone was pondering this. Midoriya seemed to be using abnormal abilities for a quirk. As even only took note. Could they be different quirks? Or is he just so advanced in his quirk, he's using several techniques? As Midoriya would tell Bakugo that it won't be a repeat of what it was like when we were kids. As Bakugo said, "I wouldn't have it any other way." As an explosion would go off. A little note for the earlier parts. Bakugo's relationship with Midoriya has changed thanks to Bakugo feeling guilty about Midoriya getting lost when they were kids. With Bakugo still being a jerk, but a little bit less hostile towards Midoriya. Bakugo would jump back as Midoriya would use slide again, trying to get behind him. As Bakugo started chuckling after he got his footing. "I see. So that slide technique of yours requires you to move. I know your tells." As Bakugo brought a gauntlet up. "And since you're pulling out a bunch of your stops, I might as well pull out my trump card." As All Might came over the speakers and told Bakugo not to do it. But Bakugo quickly ignored him. As he just said, "I store up my sweat in these gauntlets. And then I release them." As he pulled a pin, Midoriya was shocked, as an explosion nearly engulfed him. Going back to Ochako, she would be chuckling at Ida's whole villain act, As the building shook, she would stumble out of her hiding spot as Ida would notice her, as they would start a fight, with Ida revealing that he removed all the loose objects for Ochako to use. As Ida would run at Ochako, trying to capture her, but she would use her gravity quirk to float, as she would jump towards the bomb before Ida grabbed it. It ran off. It ran to the other side of the room, panting at the fact that this bomb was really big and heavy. Meanwhile, the floor Midoriya and Bakugo was filled with dust. Bakugo saying, maybe I did go a little too far, but before a kick connected with the side of his head, with Midoriya saying, "Were you trying to kill me?" with his clothes smoking and being a little smoldered. "You nearly cooked me," with Bakugo saying, "That hurt you, nerd." As the fight would continue, All Might would begin trying to chastise Bakugo, but wasn't getting through thanks to the fact that both were pretty much going at it full throttle. Bakugo nearly used his second gauntlet in this fight before Midoriya would swing down and destroy the pin, saying, "You think I'm gonna let you use that again, Kachan?" As Bakugo had a snarling look on his face. But before the two could do any more damage, All Might would announce that the hero team won. Ochako managed to trick Ida into moving the bomb where she could reach it, as Bakugo would go out in a huff, with Midoriya scratching the back of his head. I think I went a little overboard, as he looked at his costume. Man, can't believe I got it decently wrecked already. As they would name Ida MVP, him actually getting into the role and actually acting the part, while Bakugo would be considered the worst at this entire operation, leaving his teammate and really having no plan for backup, with Midoriya coming in second for confronting Bakugo by himself and with a reckless strategy. All Might would be pondering Midoriya's abilities and what the heck were they. The rest of the matches would go as in canon, with Todoroki standing out. After those matches, as Ida just walked up, "Yes, Midoriya, I just saw your fight with Bakugo on the monitors, and you managed to produce a sword? I thought your quirk was some sort of teleportation." Midoriya would just say, "It's a lot more complicated than that." As Bakugo walked up and said, "Hey nerd, how the heck did you get so strong?" As Midoriya would just say, "Well, a lot of different things. My quirk's very in-depth. I don't want to bore you." With Bakugo huffing, "There's something else there." Bakugo wouldn't have the same inferiority complex as in canon due to stuff that happened earlier on in this What If, but he would still be very interested. The next day, Midoriya would be going to school when he found dozens of reporters outside the school. Apparently the knowledge about All Might being a teacher had been revealed to the public, and the reporters were going nuts. They would try to get an interview with Midoriya, but he would try to get away. The reporters would actually surround him and start trying to boggle his mind with answers before he just said, "Minor teleportation," as a purple light would surround him as he would disappear. The reporters would wonder what happened to him, as on the other side of UA's defense wall, he would just appear. Happy that he managed to get that to work. Aizawa, walking to try to get the reporters from harassing the rest of the students before they were late, would just see Midoriya and say, "Glad to see you managed to make it. Gone to class, I'll be there in a minute." As everyone else managed to shuffle in about 10 minutes late thanks to the reporters harassing them. Luckily, one of the teachers had already told them that it wouldn't be held against them since it was due to external circumstances outside of the school. And very obvious external circumstances. As Aizawa looked at them seriously, once he walked in, as everyone was freaking out that it was another quirk apprehension test. as Izawa, in a very serious tone, told them that they had to pick a class representative. Everyone was pretty thrilled that it was just a normal school event. No crazy life and death match, or another quirk apprehension test. This would go very similar to in canon, with Ida actually being elected this time as class representative, off the bat. Ida was surprised, but he seemed like the most capable person to a lot of people. After all, Midoriya seemed a lot more of mysterious in this one, so not as many people voted for him. Ida and Uraraka did, but there was just enough votes to get Ida in, with Momo being his vice rep. Ida would be unsure as they went to the cafeteria. The group would start talking about their families as Uraraka revealed her the reason why she wants to become a hero is actually for the money. Ida and Midoriya had a bit of a surprised look on their face, but they were going to let her continue before they judged. And then she explained that her parents were actually poor and she wanted some way to help them out. Ida and Midoriya would tell her that that's a great reason. As Uraraka looked happy, she thought she would be very highly judged. As they're eating, Midoriya would ask Ida how his family is, and Ida would actually mention that his brother's a pro hero called Ingenium. Midoriya's eyes would lighten up and say, "Oh, that's a famous pro hero family." Ida would nod, mentioning that it went all the way back to his grandfather, and that he wants to make them proud. But right after Ida told Midoriya and Uraraka about his family, Midoriya would sense something. It felt like mana, but that was just in the other world, as he referred to the Black Clover universe. As the alarm started going off, everyone started to freak out. Ida would ask what was going on. Then one of the second years passing by would say, "Those are the alarms for a villain attack. That's never happened." As everyone got their butts in gear. The problem is, the normal drills for calm and orderly had been completely forgotten. The hallways packed side to side. Both Hero Chorus and the normal students were trapped between a rock and a hard place. Most of them didn't quite know what to do. Ida would get shoved against the wall and notice that it was just the reporters that had been harassing him earlier that day. As Ida tried getting everyone's attention, telling him it was the reporters that were harassing him earlier that day, but everyone was in a panic and couldn't hear him. He would manage to touch Uraraka, and she would be able to float him up and over the crowd. Above the exit door, he would tell them that it was just the reporters and to look outside. They're UA students. They should be better than this. After a majority of the students realized what was going on, they felt ashamed. Well, mostly the non-Hero Course students, because the Hero Course were kind of just stuck there, as the day would go on into normal. But little to their knowledge, the front gate had been destroyed with a power. As that drama settled down, the next day, Midoriya would go to the Black Clover world to deliver some spices. And he had an odd request for delivery. It was some information about quirks. Midoriya took his own notebooks, because he had notebooks on quirks, and brought them. Apparently, Yami knew someone who was very interested in quirks, and also had told him about quirks. When Midoriya handed Yami the book, Yami said thank you, and then proceeded to say, "Geez, Julius, you couldn't just ask the kid yourself?" Before rolling his eyes. Midoriya didn't know what to say, and continued on. School would be normal for the next few days, when Aizawa told them to get on the bus. They were going to go to a field trip. As the students would get on the bus, as Ida tried forming them into a seating arrangement, but with the bus having an odd seating arrangement for standard buses, Ida just kind of gave up on that, as everyone started talking. As everyone got on the conversation of different quirks, Midoriya would actually compliment a couple people on their quirks before Sue would ask him about his. Midoriya would just say it was complicated, but basically he had a dimensional type of ability. similar to space, but vastly more complicated, as everyone once again shrugged at this very, very vague answer. Bakugo would be looking at him incredulously, still trying to figure out what on earth his quirk was. From his information, it was one thing, but from what Bakugo's seen, it's something other, or maybe more than one quirk. As we actually flash over to All Might, as he's been doing a lot of hero work, realizing that he's actually starting to run out of time, as he starts mentally scolding himself. He had told Yue he would be there to help teach the class. He would feel down, especially with the fact that he needs to find out what Midoriya's quirk is, or if he has multiple ones. As he started to be worried that Midoriya had some sort of connection to All for One. After all, that's the only way he could think Midoriya had almost completely different abilities. From what his quirk paper said, and from what he saw, it almost seemed like multiple. But All for One wouldn't have just given him all those quirks and not altered his paperwork, right? He would shake his head as he arrived at UA, as he went into his small white form. Once he would mentally scold himself again, hoping that maybe he would be able to get to the end of the class at least, if he didn't stretch himself too hard during. As everyone would arrive at their field trip destination, as Hero 13 would meet them outside and say that this facility's the USJ, ushering them in. She would explain that this was specifically designed to train heroes for rescue duty, as she went into an explanation that quirks can be very dangerous if not used correctly. As Midoriya sensed that mana again, walk over to investigate, since mana should only exist in the other world. But then, when he walked over, he would see a dark portal opening up, and what looked like figures walking out. Aizawa would yell over to Midoriya to pay attention, but would end halfway through his statement, as he told everyone to get back. 13, get the students to safety. As 13 asked him what was going on, but saw what was going on. Villains were invading. As several students would ask if they were props, Aizawa would just tell them, no, this is serious. As Midoriya, in his hero costume, would just tell, unlike in canon, Midoriya would just tell Aizawa to be careful, before he went back to the rest of the group. Aizawa would jump down and confront several villains right away, disabling them. But before the group could make it to the door, they would be confronted by Koagiri. As Midoriya realized he was the one emanating mana. Wait, no. There's two. As he's pretty sure there's at least one back where Aizawa's fighting, and then this guy. What's going on, he would think. As 13 was about to tell them to get down, Bakugo and Kirishima would jump in front of the rest of the class, trying to attack Koagiri. But at that moment, Koagiri's dark mist would shoot out. Midoriya would get in front of everyone, pulling out his grimoire and saying, Dimensional Shield! As a round shield would appear in front of a good chunk of the class. But everyone else would get teleported. Midoriya would clench his teeth in frustration, before 13 told everyone to get out of her way. She would remove one of her finger caps on her suit, and start trying to suck Koagiri in. But it would only hold Koagiri for a minute, as he created a portal behind 13, and started sucking her into the portal using her own quirk. Koagiri would just chuckle at this, and the fact that the reason why this is happening is that 13 over-prioritized rescue work over combat. Within a couple seconds, 13 would have closed her cap and would have had bad lacerations on her back thanks to her quirk. Uraraka and Ida would rush to her, with both of them confirming she was still alive. Midoriya would just say that someone has to run outside. Their communications have been jammed ever since the villains entered. As everyone wanted Ida to go. Was gonna protest, but Midoriya and the rest of the class would just ensure him that he was the right person for the job. He was the fastest one of them. As Ida just said, well, what are you going to do about this villain? As Midoriya pulled out his grimoire and his staff, and just said, I'll be fighting this villain here. Ida, you go. As everyone was kind of curious, why did Midoriya have a staff? As he pointed out the villain, as a blast of energy would shoot out from it, as it passed through some of the villain's smoke. As everyone just started getting even more confused.
as Ito would make a rush for the door. At the same time, Midoriya would use Shift and appear behind Kogiri, kicking him in the back. Kogiri would grunt, as Midoriya just said that he had thought he had seen something metal. As Uraraka used this moment to run up and touch Kogiri, reversing his gravity, as one of the buff students would manage to punch Kogiri away. Midoriya would then use minor teleportation to get behind Kogiri and try launching a spell at him. Dimensional magic, Void Sphere! As a dark sphere would go up and try to expand and absorb Kogiri. Kogiri would use his smoke to create a portal as there was a flash of white light as both techniques counteracted each other. As Kogiri would use his black smoke to attack, and Midoriya would use Shift again. As Midoriya and Kogiri would start to have a scuffle. Meanwhile, checking in on everyone around, Bakugo and Kirishima would be battling villains in the earthquake zone. Shota Todoroki would be freezing villains in the landslide zone, with other students being under attack or trapped in other zones. Sue would have been sent to the water zone, but managed to sneak away from the rest of the villains, swimming towards shore where Mr. Aizawa was. Meanwhile, Aizawa would, after swearing to himself after accidentally letting a villain escape, as the main villain with hands, Shigaraki, would actually start saying, I think I figured out how your quirk works, as he runs forwards. As Shigaraki would manage to touch Aizawa's elbow, as Aizawa muffled a cry of pain as part of his arm decayed, as he quickly used his erasure quirk on Shigaraki before pushing him away. As Shigaraki just said, yes, you wear those goggles to confuse your opponent and who you're looking at, but your true tell is your hair. It stands up every time you use your quirk. And you can't use your quirk continuously. Every time you blink, your quirk deactivates. As Aizawa would start to really think that this fight wasn't going to go his way if he didn't try to stop this now. After all, this villain had just figured out his quirk's weakness. And with that information, it won't take very long for others to surround him. As someone ran up behind him saying, I bet you can't counteract my mutation type quirk, as Aizawa just kicked him. As Shigaraki just said, geez, I know we got these guys for a premium, but some of them aren't that bright. Nomu, finish this. As Nomu would dash up to Aizawa and slam his head into the ground. Meanwhile, with Midoriya firing off offensive dimensional spells, while Kogiri would counter. Ida had already run out of the building, and there's nothing Kogiri do about it. He did keep trying to neutralize Midoriya, but he kept dodging. As Kogiri would start to say something. I've figured it out. You seem to have multiple techniques. But two things stand out. Every time you say shift, you teleport to where you can see. And every time you use teleportation, you teleport to somewhere where you can't see. As Midoriya clenched his teeth. He was right. My minor teleportation got him to where he couldn't see with things like behind walls, while Shift managed to teleport him to wherever he saw. As Kogiri would then just say, interesting that we managed to find another person with a spatial quirk. We're so rare. It would be a real shame if I had to kill you here. As Midoriya just pointed his staff towards him, saying, it would be a real shame if you didn't just surrender and save me the trouble of beating you. While trying to channel his best you-know impression, Midoriya would start sweating a little at the fact that this fight wasn't ending quickly. At this rate, he might run out of mana. As Kogiri teleported away, he would teleport to where Shigaraki was, with him explaining how one of the students had escaped. Shigaraki would start scratching his neck, saying that if it wasn't for the fact that you're our way out, I might just kill you. But oh well, All Might wasn't here to start with. But maybe, just maybe, we'll get his attention by killing a couple of these kids. As he quickly turned around, noticing Sue had been watching this interaction. But right before he touched her face, Midoriya would come down, this time with his dimensional sword, as he brought it down, trying to cut off Shigaraki from touching Sue. Knowing that whatever his quirk is, it must deal with touch, considering he's going to grab her. But before he could, the Nomu would move in front of him, taking the sword strike instead. As Midoriya quickly jumped away, with Sue diving into the water to get away from Shigaraki. I see we have a hero. Actually, that's kind of ironic. I guess you'll just have to go. As Midoriya quickly braced himself. He had just followed Kodagiri, not wanting him to actually help the villains escape or attack his classmates again. He wasn't expecting this, as he turned and saw Aizawa on the ground. As he clenched his teeth, thinking, this isn't good. I'm way over my head. I kind of wish I switched places with Asta right now. Meanwhile, Asta, he was currently dealing with the whole dungeon arc. As Midoriya would be staring down Shigaraki and the Nomu, the doors would explode open as All Might walked through, gritting his teeth. As he said, I am here. Shigaraki would look up at All Might at the top of the stairs and say, I see the final boss has finally arrived. Nomu, get ready. As Midoriya would use shift to get close enough to Aizawa, and then use minor teleportation to get both of them disappearing and appearing at the top of the steps. All Might would shoot down the stairs, taking out several villains on the way, as him and Nomu would clash. As debris flew up around them, they struck each other so quickly and powerfully that shockwaves would travel out. It would look like they had a half dozen arms each as they slugged away at each other. As Midoriya would look on to the battlefield, he would be shocked. The blows were traveling so fast. He'd seen Asta move quickly, but this was ridiculous. He silently whispered to himself. Shigaraki would say, you think you can just overpower him like that? My Nomu has shock absorption. As All Might would quickly try to trick the Nomu and try to pull a suplex on him, with him bringing him down, it resulting in a massive explosion of force that would shock everyone on the stairs. Everyone on the top of the stairs. They looked down, breath caught in their throats. Many of them had believed he had done it. Well, when the smoke cleared, they realized that the smoke villain they saw earlier had used one of his portals so that the Nomu would go through it instead of crashing into the ground. Right behind All Might, grabbing him. All Might would look pained as the Nomu's fingers would dig into his side. Midoriya would charge his magic sword, made out of mana, would glow intensely. Midoriya would think, I got to go. Go down there and help. Just can't let them kill him. Midoriya would charge down the steps, using shift to charge Kodagiri. He would appear a few feet away with his sword outstretched. As Shigaraki would stick his hand through the portal to touch Midoriya, but Midoriya had his sword outstretched. Shigaraki would try to pull his hand away from the sword, but it was too late, as it cut a gash from one side of the palm to the other. Shigaraki would scream in pain, You brat! You cut me! Midoriya would stand there for a second as an explosion went off a couple feet from him, come out of nowhere. As Kirishima and Bakugo had arrived, the Nomu would be frozen on one side up to his hand by Todoroki, and Bakugo would be holding down Kodagiri, the smoke villain. Kodagiri would squirm as an explosion would burst against his neck brace. Bakugo would threaten that, I'll blow you up if you don't stop squirming. As All Might would break free of the Nomu's grasp and get back on his feet. He would tell the kids to get out of there as the Nomu would break the ice, escaping. Everyone was shocked until they saw regenerate. Midoriya would have a bit of bile raise in his throat at the mangled body that was reforming. As all of them stood in shock, the Nomu would regenerate. And Shigaraki would say, Nomu, free Kodagiri. As a large blast of air would push past Midoriya as he yelled, Bakugo! But he would see behind him that All Might had taken the blow. He would look behind him and see that All Might had taken the blow. As All Might would stand, saying, Thanks for saving me, kids. I think I'm only gonna fall for that trick once. As All Might would push the Nomu back, they would rush towards each other as fists clashed like thunder. This time, the blows were too fast for them to follow. It just looked like a wave of motion, as sound like thunder and air rushed past their faces. Midoriya would wonder for a second if he would have hearing loss. He would push this thought aside, though. He dared not look away from the battle that decided their fate. As All Might started overpowering the Nomu, All Might would say, "You mentioned before it had shock absorption, not nullification," as he began to overwhelm the Nomu, as he sent the Nomu flying backwards. As he said, "That means he has an upper limit." After that, Midoriya and the rest of the group lost track of the battle, as what appeared to be a bluish, yellowish blur and a black blur started rushing across the battlefield. This would only last a second, though, as the black blur would fly up into the air, with what appeared to be All Might rushing up after him, grabbing his leg and throwing him down to the ground. All Might shooting back to the ground next to him. "You said before this was meant to defeat me, but I'll teach you what these words truly mean," as air compressed around his fist. As he said, "Plus Ultra!" with All Might's fist shooting into the Nomu, propelling him into the air with a massive shockwave. It would collide with the outer wall of the USJ and fly straight through onto the other side. Shigaraki would be nursing his arm, and simply say to Kogiri, "We're leaving," as the door opened and the UA Pro Hero teachers would rush in. Shigaraki would escape, but as Kogiri was about to disappear, Midoriya would run over to him. Midoriya's grimoire would appear, adding a new page, as Midoriya tried grabbing Kogiri, as he would disappear in a purple flash of light. Midoriya realizing that he had accidentally teleported Kogiri somewhere. He realized he had just randomly teleported Kogiri to who knows where. And all the teachers would quickly save whoever was left, ending this little bit of the arc. The students would be rescued, the police would follow up and haul off the criminals to jail. They would also interview the students, making sure Midoriya didn't incinerate the smoke villain, as Midoriya would explain that he had actually used his quirk to teleport the smoke villain to where he didn't know. He didn't have a location in mind, so he couldn't even start to think where he teleported him to. Classes would be postponed for a few days. Midoriya would go home, with him planning to go to visit Austin the Black Bulls, but before he could, someone would knock on his door. It was Bakugo, demanding to know, "What's up with your quirk?" Power, gesturing to Midoriya. Midoriya would say, "I don't know what you mean." Bakugo responding with, "You can conjure a sword, use 2 different types of teleportation. What is your quirk, Midoriya?" Midoriya would look around saying, "I'm surprised no one else is with you. I'm sure they're going to have questions for me." Bakugo responded with, "They probably did, but I'm the only one who knows where you live." Midoriya, knowing that he needs to come clean to someone, eventually Midoriya would just tell Bakugo to meet him at the overpass. The one I used to go under to get home from our old school. Meet me there in an hour. Now, a scene in the Black Clover universe. Kogiri would wake up on the ground. He thought he saw a skull in the distance. Ugh, that boy must have teleported me using his quirk. Where am I? I can feel my way back home, but it's distant. I should check out this location further. As Kogiri teleported away. And that's the end of the video. If you gotten this far, thank you. And since you got this far, you might as well like and comment. That's a great way to let me know whether or not you want more of this. And don't forget to subscribe to receive notifications about more of this content and similar content. Share if you think your friends will like it. And with that being said, this will be the Spellery sign out. Hope you have a wonderful day.